Here we are again. Here we are again.
The basis for this is we were actually sent this article in our Discord. You can see here it's an article published about the future of artificial intelligence in education. 13 things we can do to minimize the damage. This was a report that was put out by Aaron Hamilton, Dylan William, and John Hattie, who are all folks kind of in that cognitive learning space. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not super familiar with Aaron Hamilton at all, outside of the fact that I
Yeah.
looked him up and he wrote a book with these other folks. So he's in that same circle. I'm also not super familiar with Dylan William outside of the fact that he's a weird Twitter stand for Elon Musk. uh, all I know. Do you know anything about Dylan William?
I've had interactions with him. He kind of runs in the like hashtag CogSci research ed kind of crowd.
I mean, Hattie is probably the most famous educational researcher, I would say. To briefly explain what visible learning is, which is Hattie's main work, it took the world by storm in what, like the late 2000s? I think it's like 2008, 2009. And what that book is and what Hattie's research is are meta analyses. So he went through a series of different meta analysis and then would make a meta analysis of the meta analyses in order to determine what Hattie determined as a good effect size. He was trying to figure out whether or not certain practices led to higher standardized test scores, which is where we start to get into a little bit of trouble. Now, he
Right.
acknowledges in visible learning that you can't take this stuff as prescriptive because all it is looking at standardized test scores. However, at the exact same time, he kind of still promotes it as things that you should do because they're increasing standardized test scores.
And the reason this is so interesting, right, is he says the hinge point for effectiveness is an effect size of right 0.4 or higher. Well,
Right.
152 interventions or influences, what they call them, about half of them have an effect size of zero point 0.4 or higher, which is, like 120 practices. So there's just so much out there that it's almost not even super useful.
It seems to me like the pitfall with Hattie's work is that people who believe what they believe about education will just look at that massive list and choose the things like go along with their pedagogy.
That is totally it.
He's kind of universally looked at as this, again, holy grail figure. Pretty sure we've mentioned Yang Zhao in every single one of our videos so far. He has a whole chapter on John Hattie. And I don't know enough about educational research to make this claim, but there's a lot of educational researchers that have looked at Hattie's work and said that it's not done correctly. More importantly, and this does make sense to me, because it's exclusively framed around standardized test scores, the data leaves out all of the other things we typically talk about, like engagement and mental health.
It's impossible to build a coherent system from these 252 practices because you can just cherry pick and choose. Yeah, it's all about how you're going to use the data to meet the goals that you have for schools and kids.
That builds us then into this article and what Hattie, William, and Hamilton are arguing. We may already be in the era of peak humanity, a time where we have the greatest levels of education, reasoning, rationality, and creativity spread out amongst the greatest number of us, a brilliant result of the massification of universal basic education and the power of the university. Basically, as they go through here, they're talking about how AI is going to impact those things with a major focus on this part here that says the grave risk is that we become de-educated and decoupled from the driving seat to the future.
This does not seem controversial, Chris. Why did you make me read a 45-page article and come sit down with you and talk about it for this recording?
Here's my thesis for the video is I don't think that Hattie, William, or Hamilton actually understand what AI is, at least in the context of what they're talking about, which is primarily ChatGPT and other large language models. And as a result, they are buying into, ironically, they talk about the hype about AI. I think they're buying into the hype about AI and making inaccurate claims both about the future and about how education should address it as a result. So there's a vein of truth in this in the sense that is ChatGPT going to change education? I mean, yeah, to an extent, but so did the internet. there's a fascination here behind the folks who are really focused on recall, standardization, more fact-based knowledge, being obsessed with programs that are really good at doing that exact thing. It opens up with this introduction here about people creating AI through like iRobot and HAL and A Space Odyssey. Talks about Deep Blue and kind of progress in real life about making these things. And then they instantly go to with ChatGPT. I think it's worth noting that HAL in Space Odyssey is vastly different than ChatGPT. Folks that are heavily engaged within artificial intelligence, especially folks in the technology industry, don't define ChatGPT as traditional artificial intelligence. It's not sentient. ChatGPT is what's called narrow AI, which is ostensibly statistics. It's a really complicated computer statistics model. It's determined through a series of mathematical formulas that what people are most likely to write next is blue in this case, right?
Sure.
This is a 3-dimensional graph. It's making almost a heat graph or an average of where the vast majority of these points lie.
I'm with you.
ChatGPT and other large language models like Bard, et cetera, are coming to their conclusions as they're running this incredibly complicated mathematical formula to point what should be said across various statistical properties in something that looks kind of like this. This is called a monotosity nonlinear graph, which I might not even be saying correctly because I've only read about this thing. Imagine a graph that looks like this, but with even more possible variables as points. So we've
Sure.
moved beyond 3 different things, and this thing is measuring, a lot. When I see this, I think of a bell curve in 3 dimensions. That is not the same thing as what HAL does in Space Odyssey.
So if the layperson were to extrapolate or buy into the hype in the marketing, because God, I see that all over the place too, they're building off of a false premise that then leads, because as we'll see in this article, they speculate what the potential future for humanity could look like 100 years from now.
This isn't to say that ChatGPT isn't impressive or useful software or isn't going to change education.
Where the red flags started to pop up for me then is where they start to say like, hey, here's how these language models work, and hey, here's how these human brains work. So they say our brains are largely about wiring and firing, and this can be thought of as a kind of computational process. Yeah, so if you strip away all of the other things, and of course the embodied nature of brains and all of that, yeah, wiring and firing, brains are pretty simple, right? They say eventually, their computational capacity is likely to exceed the combined brain power of every human that has ever lived.
There's an irony here, right? Like brains can be reduced to inputs and outputs. Hattie's research is all based around simplifying learning down to standardized test scores and then
Inputs and
changing the
outputs.
inputs. Yeah.
Page 9 starts to address questions that like skeptics like you and I probably would ask. So they have a header that reads, but aren't we humans much more than mere machines? And they go on to actually say like, no, we are just machines. Here's some things to say. We have consciousness. And they come back with research that says like, oh, your thermostat might have consciousness. Really at this point, then they're defining humanity out of the picture. Aren't they? Aren't humans are exactly like these computational machines? And aren't these machines really scary because they could be like us? I don't know. I'm not there yet.
That is incredibly reductive to how our brains work. We still don't even really understand how a lot of this stuff works. And to reduce it down to how machines work is a vast oversimplification. Again, it goes through this abstract, and then it goes through this introduction that compares the AI of ChatGPT to iRobot. It then gives a pretty bog standard definition of AI benefits and concerns for education, things that most people are talking about. So kids cheating on tests and being able to easily look up information and plagiarize without being detected, being able to give feedback easier. It generates things really quickly. Then it says, what if machines were to advance super quick? They then go through in a lot more detail how our brains work. Again, it's highly simplified,
Where they say in a nutshell there, they say, oh, well, so the reason that they put the brain and language models next to each other is because they say these systems are not dissimilar to the human brain's prefrontal cortex, the part of us that does the abstract thinking and separates us from the animals. But here's the really interesting part, right? In order to make the case that these language models are like the human brain, they have to take off a chunk of the brain and say it is like part of the brain.
Humans are not inputs and outputs, whereas a statistician could explain to you how an AI works, how a ChatGPT works. You can read online how it works. Is it complicated? Yeah, but it's nothing in comparison to brain research. They are very different from each other.
How they determine the capability of AI systems and what they value human beings perform well on are really telling in the terms
Yeah,
of what they value both for us and for the machines.
it's right here.
AI performance should say more about the value systems of testing and their relationship to human capabilities than about the strength of AI models relative to the average human as they have
Yeah.
on this chart, right? So it's kind of this idea of like, we'll let the computers take the tests. This is only the LSAT, what only measures, right, a small slice of human cognitive performance at a particular day and time.
They're also on the internet. Like it's not this comparison doesn't make any sense to me because
Right.
if I were to take, let's say, the SAT evidence-based reading and writing course, right?
Right.
And I had access to the entire internet to take the test, I think I probably could do better than GPT 3.5 or maybe even GPT 4.0 because I would have access to all of the information that GPT is using to answer the questions. Like this just doesn't this just make sense? The language learning model is statistically finding on the internet every person that has ever answered a question similar to that and running it through training and all the stuff that's going on in the back end to come up with the most plausible answer.
Think of like Bletchley Park and the code breakers in World War II. Like they were using Alan Turing and his crew, right? Were using the earliest versions of computers to decode the most complicated codes on Earth. Like computers have been doing just that thing for what 70 years. This should not be controversial, right? You're putting computers and humans up against the things that computers are trained to do best.
It's just another tool. And ironically, these tests never adopted to the last major tool that changed how we would think and understand complex information, which was the invention of, again, the internet.
Right.
You can't use the internet on these tests because it's considered to be cheating. But now we have yet another tool that is ostensibly harnessing what you can do on the internet. It's a very quick form
Right.
way that you could use the internet even faster. The test never adjusted to the previous thing. Now the tests need to adjust to the current thing.
You can't cherry pick the things that the machines do best and then say that a human can't stand up to it. My gosh.
They go through and they then basically bring up the argument of aren't machines just mindless plagiarists? I don't think this does a good enough job explaining that they are plagiarists in the sense of they're not creating new knowledge. They're combining knowledge together when AI becomes open and it's not just reading the existing data from 2021 and before, then it quickly like destroys itself. It no longer makes things that make any sense because it it's not self-aware.
But I was trying to find this while you were going through that. And this is the creator of, isn't this the creator, how do you pronounce this? Studio Ghibli. But they showed him, it's only 2 minutes, but they showed him
Mhm.
artificial intelligence model based on all of this. And his response is so great.
そうです。これ踊ってるように見えますけど、でこれは早く移動するっていうのを学習させたやつなんですね。これ頭を使って移動してるんですけど、基本痛覚とかないし、頭が大事とかっていう概念がないんで、これはもう頭をもう普通の足。面白いと思って見ることできないですよ。これを作る人たちは痛みとかそういうものについてね、何も考えないでやってるでしょ。極めて不愉快ですよね。そんなに気持ち悪いものをやりたいなら勝手にやってればいいだけで、僕はこれを自分たちの仕事をつなげたいとは全然思いません。極めて何か生命に対する侮辱を感じます。
needs to be the thumbnail for this. I strongly feel that this is an insult to life itself.
I have to offer Baudrillard at every possible occasion. But I mean, this was Baudrillard's whole thing, was the embracing of technology, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. And he was writing about this stuff. I'm pretty sure this is from a book in 1990. What such machines offer is the spectacle of thought. And in manipulating them, people devote themselves more to the spectacle of thought than to thought itself. The impressiveness of the large language model becomes more important than what it's actually doing. So they say, again, in a nutshell, these systems already exceed the average human in a number of domains, sometimes by leaps and bounds, and they have accelerated fast in their capabilities over the past half decade. They are not just dumb plagiarists. Would we say that a calculator exceeds the average human in a number of domains because it can do it by leaps and bounds, because they can do super complicated calculations? Are they not like just a simple tool?
Now they're going to get into a place pretty quickly where it's like, okay, well, let's extrapolate this out 50 or 100 years. They imagine this exponential trend where like we're going to move past the AI, the normal AI, and they're going to move to like super AI.
Worth noting too that they define here in Figure 5 narrow AI as like a one-trick pony. They say that the current consensus in the AI community is that GPT-4 has exceeded the capabilities of narrow AI and have exceeded artificial general intelligence. I don't find that same information. It says we're 2 years away from AGI.
Yes.
Cross-domain systems that can operate at human levels of ability in all cognitively demanding tasks. They're AKA human level intelligence. Does that mean that they're suggesting that in 2 years, they believe that we're going to create robots that are humans?
They kind of address that because they start to talk about the embodied stuff. When you get to AGI, it could quickly make the leap to ASI because they can program themselves. And so they think less than 5 years after AGI is achieved, we'll get to the God in a box sort of thing.
They're saying that advances in computational thinking are making it easier for AI to drive cars or walk upstairs, etc. Self-driving cars, they, yes, can drive on straight roads, but the amount of times that they fail and don't work, and really what they're doing is not anywhere close to our interpretation of like a Jetsons or Minority Report future where the cars are just autopilot. So let's get into the short-term implications.
So what they say then is they compare, say having a calculator or whatever, but then about like, oh my gosh, might we even forget how to read? Because again, we won't have a need to do it. But they say there's no connection to actual human values on here. They just kind of say all of this stuff as kind of being like, it's very deterministic. It's like, oh, the machines do all the thinking for us. They're going to do all the reading for us. We're not even going to have a need to read. So we're going to forget how to do this. And right, we forget just the fact that, oh, humans might still want to be able to do those things. So yes, we will have literacy and we'll teach each other how to do these because we value that as a human society. Here's where I kind of get back on board with things, right? Because I do think that there is space, and I think we need to have a conversation about what the regulatory environment should or could look like for AI. I think that is really important. They say here that 4 scenarios could be that future AI developments are banned. I don't think the system is going to move fast enough to catch up with that.
Capitalism will prevent that ever from happening. That doesn't make any sense. There's too much money being made in AI. No one's going to regulate it. Regulations that require humans and AI to work together, what they call fake work.
Fake work. If I ram a nail into the wall with my forehead instead of a hammer, that's real work, right? When you use a hammer to drive the nail, that's fake work. You're not doing the work yourself.
I agree that AI could eliminate jobs. Like the current way at which AI works could eliminate the jobs. But it is worth noting the jobs that we're talking about have already been eliminated to machines. Like this has already happened in the auto industry. It's already happened in various different spaces where machines have made certain jobs not require as much manpower.
Yeah, the other 2 options, transhumanism, which is what the realm of the neuromancer, where you can kind of plug in different things, brain chips and all that, and then UBI. So again, here's where I kind of got back on board with their things.
In the exact same way that people can use Hattie's research to come to conclusions about changing education in a more progressive way, because he has data that improves standardized test scores, and people that focus on direct instruction and more authoritarian styles of school can use Hattie's research to come to conclusions because it raises standardized test scores. We can both come to the same conclusion on UBI for entirely different reasons. And
we've tried UBI programs. Well, we have one. It's called Social Security, but we've tried UBI experiments
it's
in different.
Incredibly popular, despite the fact it is a scary socialist program. It has social in the title of it. This is a fundamental question about economic systems, not about technological innovation. And it's dangerous to start mixing those two things together, because the people who control the future of artificial intelligence have economic incentives to scenario 3, which is transhumanism.
Kind of humans and machines merging. It's almost like the Google Glass idea or the new Apple like goggle kind of thing, but like built into our bodies, right? Kind of this classic sort of cyborg,
right? It's the
implant,
Elon Musk
genetic
Neuralink
modification
thing, as it's
idea.
mentioned in the paper here. AI
So that's exactly
will
it.
greatly exceed the capabilities of organic humans, and that some of us might welcome the option of upgrading ourselves. The 2016.
It's framed as being just like value neutral, right? We know Musk is not a value neutral guy. Look at what he allows and how he manipulates his own social media platform, right? He says here, or that says in the paper, Musk's hunch was the one day AI would greatly exceed the capabilities of organic humans, and that some of us might welcome the option of being able to upgrade ourselves. So there have been so much controversy here about this shift. Now look at animal testing and human testing are right next to it here. Now it says Neuralink received FDA approval for human clinical trials in May 2023, but let's back that train up and look at how successful the animal trials have been. So they've surgically implanted them in the brains of live monkeys, pigs, and other animals. They've been criticized by groups like PETA. There's a group, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, alleged Neuralink and UC Davis had mistreated several monkeys. Because this is a very recent headline from just in the last month. Neuralink, Elon Musk's brain implant startup, raises $280 million from Peter Thiel's venture capitalist fund. Okay, so Peter Thiel, big venture capitalist, has put a lot of money, particularly into reactionary politics, more on the extreme side. There's nothing, right, to mention in this about the political control or the political climate or the racist, sexist beliefs of the people like Elon Musk and people in his circle who are going to be navigating what that transhumanism looks like.
And
right, they're people. They're not comfortable. They're not comfortable with transsexual people. How are they going to be comfortable with transhumanist people?
And to connect that back to the meta-analysis work that informs standardized testing and practices to change at all from Hattie, it intentionally does not include any of that contextual information. So they don't factor in concepts like race, gender, home, community, etc., because in their eyes, they don't believe that those are things that teachers or schools can change. Like that is like their whole thing is, how can we change the inputs of school in order to increase standardized test scores, because that's something that schools can control. They dive into the implications for education. They say that why would anyone go to school or university when they could download to their brains anything that they needed to know from an app store in mere seconds, where they can learn how to drive a car, speak Arabic, or interact with regular, i.e. non-upgraded humans with compassion and empathy.
Insert the I know Kung Fu clip from The Matrix here.
I've been reading a lot of Franco Berardi recently, and Franco Berardi's a philosopher, does a lot of work surrounding the future and understanding the future. He wrote this piece where he quoted this guy I've never heard of. His name is Ernesto de Martino. His work surrounded religion and anthropology and investigating like magic and witchcraft. Very like weird out there guy. So he has this quote, regardless, where he talks about defining the end of the world. And it was a warning because he wrote this book about the apocalypse. And he said, when societies are no longer able to interpret the world they are experiencing, we can speak of the end of their world. The end of the world is our inability to interpret the signs that surround us. The implication for education wouldn't be in this article the idea that people could quickly understand a bunch of rote-based facts. If we reduce everything down to fact-based learning, then it becomes an issue of power and control. So the endpoint of this, of just downloading information very quickly, becomes a factor of whose information are we downloading. And education isn't addressing that, both in the current fact-based model, because that's considered to be fluff, but it's also not addressing it in this long-term scenario because it's outside of this neutral worldview of how the world works.
Let's say I've got the Neuralink. I'm going to download Hitler's Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
All right. It's all in there. Okay. Oh, now I know all of these great things. I've accessed this information. Mein Kampf and all of the things written about it ever. And you can say, oh, well, it's a nuanced conversation about all this. Still, are you going to act or are you not going to act?
The frustrating part of this to me is that, just like I was saying before, this is already a problem. We don't need to wait on this future where AI takes control of information that we can download. Kids and adults already need to know how to recognize and decipher information and where it comes from. The I guess obvious interventions that are proposed by folks that are in this like evidence visible learning camp of facts, standardized testing, and regurgitating those things already is ignoring those contextual things that allow us to understand power, control, what we understand, how to use things. It's always worth noting whose kids are getting this fact-based rote memorization. Astronova, which is Elon Musk's school that he started. It's an experimental school with small class sizes. And let's go to their course options here. Now, what am I learning about? I'm learning about AI and consciousness, animal biomechanics, Python, fan fiction, drawing, competitive programming, asteroid search team. And if you look through each one of these, they're not just fact-based information. These are like complicated human things to learn about, right? They're experiential programs where kids are going out and figuring things out and learning by doing.
Jeff Bezos, also the Bezos Academy, which are these tuition-free Montessori-inspired preschools. So, right, who has access to this versus whose kid has to go to a freaking teach like a champion charter school?
The cognitive dissonance here of what happens when Bezos and Musk market these to like low-income families and stuff, and then corporations are controlling what information goes out, what information comes in. Then you have a problem at scale of almost encapsulating progressive education. All right, so let's get into the recommendations. Is that going to bring it home? First, they're saying that we need to work on the assumption that we're only 2 years away from artificial general intelligence. I think we've kind of said ad nauseum that we're not. But again, getting to the point of these problems that they're seeking to address already exist. The assumption that we need to change things right now has nothing to do with artificial intelligence. Look at the world around us. It's already messed up. Like, we need to change things now for a variety of reasons, not just AI. Establishing a global regulatory framework.
Beyond the speculation, I think some of these are not super far-fetched. Like, yes, we need a global regulatory framework. Okay.
And they dive into as well, like end user applications should go through risk board approvals. Okay. Students should not have unfettered access to these systems before trials have been completed. I do want to put a big asterisk on that and say, I'd be curious about their idea of implementing artificial intelligence, because in our view, and we've spoken about this a lot in our other resources, schools should be covering artificial intelligence and how to interpret it. Systems used by students should have guardrails. Yeah, of course. Make it illegal for AI systems to impersonate humans. Easier said than done, but I'm not opposed to that. Measures to mitigate bias and discrimination. Regulations around data privacy, sure. Regulate AI systems, sure.
All existing stuff.
Yeah,
that's the interesting
this is
part,
all
right?
just stuff around.
Different from the rhetoric in the rest of the paper, right? This big expansive thing, and here they are, be like, well, the answer is in more regulation. Like, okay, that's already a thing. Like, we're not doing it. Let's do the most basic thing.
I did want to bring up one more Baudrillard quote. He said, in regards to artificial intelligence kind of taking over, he says, by entrusting this burdensome intelligence to machines, we are released from any responsibility to knowledge, much as entrusting power to politicians allows us to disdain any aspiration of our own to power. If we assume that artificial intelligence in its current form, or even in the next few years, is as intelligent as us because it can understand how to do standardized tests very well, we're giving up our power and nuance in interpreting ideas instead of recognizing the pitfalls of what AI is and understanding it at a deeper level. I just hope that people understand that it's not that we're saying that AI isn't a big deal or that ChatGPT isn't a big deal or that we shouldn't be concerned about it in education. It's just the way that this is being spoken about is through a very old school standardized test lens that needs to change now that has nothing to do with AI.
Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe and comment with the implant you're most looking forward to in our transhumanist future. Remember, we've got a donation drive going on right now. So go to humanrestorationproject.org and let's restore humanity together.